The Compass Saloon sits right at the town's main crossroads, where the four paths leading north, south, east, and west collide. It stands as the hallmark of the Vane brothers' power. This afternoon, the fog is so thick that the oil lamps hanging from the porch cast only faint, sickly yellow circles of light, looking like the eyes of a mangy cur. Inside, the heat of bodies, the stench of rot gut whiskey, and heavy tobacco smoke create an air you could cut with a knife. Today's the scheduled tax collection. At the largest round table, positioned directly beneath a massive brass compass mounted on the ceiling, four men are seated. They are the four horsemen of death in this territory. North Vane, the eldest, sits center stage. He wears a suit of jet black wool, tailored so sharply he looks like a tuxedo at a barn dance among the muscle-bound lumberjacks surrounding him. North's face is gaunt, his ashen eyes always glimmering with a cold, calculating intelligence. He doesn't hold a gun. His hands grip a book of philosophy by Marcus Aurelius. To North, violence is a low-level tool. He runs Oakhaven through systematic fear. To his right sits South, a giant of a man with shoulders as wide as a barn door. Unlike his refined older brother, South leaves his arms bare, displaying tattoos of grotesque shapes. A heavy iron chain is perpetually wrapped around his right wrist, the links clanking every time he downs his drink. South is the muscle, the one who carries out the most brutal physical punishments. Opposite them is East, the money man. He wears a silk vest, his fingers dripping with gold rings, busily flipping through ledgers with a shifty expression. East doesn't care for philosophy or blood. He only cares about figures. He's the man who has foreclosed on nearly half the ranches in Oakhaven. And finally, leaning against the bar with a reckless air, is West. He's only 19, barely a man with a delicate face, but eyes that burn with the trigger-happy mania of a powder addict. West's draw is so fast, folks rumor he can clip a fly's wing before it even flaps. He is the wild card, the terror of anyone unlucky enough to lock eyes with him. The saloon doors swing open. A cold draft sweeps in, bringing road dust and the chill of the mist. A man walks in. He isn't a cowboy nor a hired gun with polished gear. He wears a coat caked in trail dust and a worn-out, wide-brimmed hat that shadows half his face. Over his shoulder is a small satchel, and in one arm, he cradles something wrapped in burlap. The man walks with a slight limp, his steps heavy but steady, heading straight for the bar. The entire saloon goes dead silent. The whispering dies out. Lumberjacks put down their half-finished glasses, their eyes tracking the stranger. In Oakhaven, a stranger means trouble. The man looks at no one. He places the burlap bundle on the counter, revealing a small wooden horse with a broken leg, a clumsy but meticulously carved toy. He removes his hat, uncovering salt and pepper hair and deep-set wrinkles on his forehead, the marks of years spent braving the elements. This is Gabriel Gray, barley whiskey, neat, Gabriel says, his voice low and gravelly, like stones rowing in a creek bed. The bartender steals a nervous glance toward the Vanes' table. He pours the drink with trembling hands, the bottle clinking against the glass. Gabriel takes the drink, but before he can bring it to his lips, a scoff echoes from the corner of the table where the East sits. "Hey, Pops," West speaks up, expertly spinning a revolver on his index finger. "You're in the wrong seat. This bar is reserved this afternoon for folks on my brother's books." Gabriel doesn't answer. He drains the glass in one gulp, then turns to look at East, who has placed the ledger on the table closest to him. "I'm just looking for directions," Gabriel says calmly. "I'm looking for the grave of a man named Julian Gray. Heard he used to work at Sawmill number 4. The name Julian Gray turns the already tense air into ice. East stops his pen, his face shifting from contempt to wariness. North, who had been buried in his book, suddenly looks up at Gabriel. "Julian was my brother," Gabriel continues, seemingly oblivious to the shift in the men around him. West stands up and approaches Gabriel, and trough. He's half a head shorter than Gabriel, but his arrogant swagger makes him look like a young wolf looking to test his fangs. "Julian, that piece of filth died in the mines 2 years ago. And around here we don't take kindly to folks digging up the past," West says, his gun barrel beginning to drift toward Gabriel's satchel. "What's in here? Gold?" Or just more of this five-and-dime junk? West uses the barrel of his gun to try and shove the satchel off the counter. But in that split second, something impossible happens. No one sees Gabriel move. 1 second, his hand is on the wooden bar. The next, a stainless steel fork left over from a nearby patron's plate is gripped in Gabriel's hand. Its tines pressed firmly under West's chin, just a hair's breadth from breaking the skin. Gabriel's other hand crushes West's gun wrist, forcing the barrel to point straight at the floor. West's entire body freezes. The famed Montana gunslinger is suddenly reduced to a helpless puppet. "Don't touch my son's gift," Gabriel says. His tone hasn't changed, but it carries an authority that sends a chill down the spines of every man nearby. "And don't you ever call my brother filth again." South bolts upright, the iron chain on his arm rattling like a growling beast. The Vane-hired guns draw their weapons in unison. The sound of hammers cocking fills the room. "That's enough," North Vane speaks. His voice isn't loud, but it has the weight to bring everything to a halt. North closes his book and stands up slowly. He walks toward Gabriel, eyeing the stranger from head to toe as if solving a complex equation. "My younger brother has a bit of a temper," North says, a thin smile appearing on his lips. "And you don't look like a brother looking for a grave. The way you hold that fork, the way you've controlled West's center of gravity. You're a soldier or a professional killer." Gabriel slowly lets go of West. West staggers back, his face flushed with humiliation. His hand moves toward his holster, but a look from North freezes the thought. "I'm just a father looking for my brother's grave." Gabriel calmly puts his hat back on, unfazed by the muzzles of 20 men. "And I'll be staying Oak Haven until I find what I came for." "This is a small town, Mr. Gray," North says, his voice dropping into a low, threatening register. "Small enough that if you accidentally drop a leaf, I'll know exactly where it lands. I hope you find that grave soon, because after that you'll want to hightail it out of here before the fog settles in your lungs." Gabriel doesn't respond. He picks up the broken wooden horse, slings the satchel over his shoulder, and walks out of the saloon. The sound of his rhythmic, limping footsteps on the wooden floor drowns out even the whistling wind outside. He heads toward the edge of town, where the dilapidated shacks of the timber workers stand. In Gabriel's mind, memories of Julian flood back. Julian, the little brother who always dreamed of a free life out west, the one who sent the last letters describing the kingdom of four directions and the crushing oppression. Gabriel stops in front of an old cellar tucked behind an abandoned sawmill. This used to be the holding pen for the Vanes' stubborn workers. He descends the damp stairs, the stench of mold and rust hitting him hard. With a small flashlight, Gabriel scans the moisture-soaked stone walls. Then he finds it. In the darkest corner of the cellar, near rusted iron shackles bolted to the wall, there are words carved with something sharp. "Big brother, don't come here. There is no gold here, only a devil named Vane. Take care of the wooden horse for Tommy." Gabriel's rough fingers touch the carvings. Julian died here, in the dark and alone, yet still worried about his nephew's birthday gift. Gabriel's anger doesn't explode like fire. It seeps into him like bitter sap. He closes his eyes, taking a deep breath of the foul air. When he steps out of the cellar, the fog is so thick the path has vanished. Gabriel doesn't look for an end. He knows he's being watched. Shadows hide behind stacks of lumber. Prying eyes watch from second-story windows. Oak Haven isn't just a town. It's a giant trap. And Gabriel Gray has just stepped into the center of it, not as a victim, but as a man seeking penance for the fallen. The beast inside him, the one he had tried to bury for 10 years after leaving the federal marshals, is beginning to stir. The night mist in Oak Haven wasn't just cold. It carried the acrid tang of rotting pine bark that clung to your lungs like a cheap coat of paint. Gabriel walked down the main drag, his uneven footfalls echoing against the gravel. He didn't need to look back to know at least 2 of West's hired guns were tailing him from 50 yards back, sticking to the shadows of the darkened buildings. Sheriff Brooks was waiting for him under the only lit oil lamp outside the station. Brooks was in his 50s, carrying a spare tire around his middle, with a face flushed red from whiskey and years of eating humble pie. The badge on his chest was tarnished, catching the light with a tired, dull glint. "Mr. Gray," Brooks started, his voice a gravelly rasp. North Vane don't take kindly to strangers loitering. And he likes the way you embarrassed his baby brother even less. I've got orders to escort you to the city limits immediately. Gabriel stopped, facing Brooks. He looked the sheriff square in the eye, not with hatred, but with a steady, calculating gaze. How long you been where met Tin Star, Brooks? Brooks fidgeted, his hands gripping his gun belt. 12 years. But that don't change the fact that you're moving on. Now, 12 years. Then you sure as hell knew Julian Gray. He didn't die in a cave-in. The scratches on that cellar wall say he was kept in a hole until his light went out. Gabriel stepped forward, getting in the man's kitchen. What do you owe the Vanes that's worth watching a 20-year-old boy starve in the dark? Brooks' face twitched. He looked like he wanted to blow a fuse or draw his iron, but Gabriel's eyes were like a frozen lake, reflecting every sin Brooks had tried to bury. You don't get it, Brooks whispered, his breath stinking of rock gut. In this town, the Vanes are the law. They pulled my neck out of a noose in Texas 10 years ago. I'm bought and paid for. Now get going, please, before West loses his cool and handles this himself. Gabriel didn't budge. He spotted a small figure hiding behind the picket fence across from the station. It was a boy with hollow eyes, but his ears seemed to catch every vibration in the air. Move it, Brooks growled again, but Gabriel just brushed past him, heading toward the small shadow. It was Leo. The kid was about 8, wearing an oversized sweater with the elbows blown out. He didn't look at Gabriel with his eyes, but as Gabriel approached, he tilted his head, his nostrils flaring. You smell like frost and old wood, Leo said, his voice strangely clear in the gloom. And I've got a wooden horse that needs a home, Gabriel replied, his voice dropping into a softness that even caught Brooks off guard. He pulled the broken toy from the burlap and placed it into the boy's trembling hands. Leo traced the carvings on the horse body, his fingers stopping at the snapped leg. A cloud of sadness crossed his face. Is he hurting, mister? He'll be all right. I'm gonna fix him up, just like we're gonna fix this town. A young woman rushed out from the dark, frantically scooping Leo up. She wore faded work clothes, her hair pinned up, with the kind of beauty a wildflower has after a hailstorm battered, but still holding ground. This was Rose. She eyed Gabriel with suspicion, mixed with shock at seeing her son smile, a rare sight in Oak Haven. I'm Rose. Leo. You don't usually talk to folks, she said out of breath. Gabriel gave a short nod. Just a traveler looking for a place to light. I heard you got a timber farm on the edge of town, a place the Vanes haven't choked out just yet. Rose went quiet, glancing at Brooks, who stood like a statue under the lamp. She knew taking this man in was calling out North Vane. But looking at that horse in Leo's hand, she saw a flicker of hope she'd lost 2 years ago when her husband disappeared in the woods. Follow me, she said shortly. Rose's place sat 2 miles west of town, tucked under a massive bluff. It was a weather-beaten 2-story house with a shed full of unsold lumber. Inside, Rose lit a small candle and set it on the worn dining table. The Vanes want the spread, Rose began, her voice turning to Flint. Not for the timber. East wants the land because it sits on the only spring feeding the town. And West, she let out a bitter scoff. He wants me. He figures breaking a widow as a feather in his cap to show off to his brother. Gabriel sat down, dropping his satchel on the floor. He didn't pry into her pain. He knew the scent of it. He went straight to the brass tacks. How many men they got? 4 brothers and maybe 20 hired guns, always hanging around the saloon. West is the deadliest, with a piece. South is a pure animal. East handles the books and the big shots in the state capital. And North, Rose shivered. He's the shadow over everything. He never gets his hands dirty, but he knows how to make you tear yourself apart. Gabriel nodded, pulling a scrap of paper and a pencil from his pocket. Tomorrow, I need you to do me a solid. I need the schedule for every one of them. When does North have his tea? When does East check the inventory? And where does West go for target practice? Rose looked at him, her eyes wide. You're going to take 'em all on? By yourself? I ain't alone, Gabriel said, glancing at Leo, who was carefully feeling the wooden horse in the corner. I've got justice on my side, and a debt to pay to the dead. The next morning, before the sun could even burn through the soup-thick mist, Gabriel walked into town. He bypassed the saloon and the law. He headed straight for Old Man Elias's carpentry shop at the end of Front Street. Elias was running a plane over a pine board when Gabriel entered. The shavings stopped falling. The old man squinted through thick lenses, sweat dripping off his brow. "I want to place an order," Gabriel said, dropping a handful of gold coins on the workbench. Elias looked at the gold, then at Gabriel. "You're the one who put the squeeze on West yesterday. The whole town's yapping about you. What do you need?" "Windows. Windows. A chest. I need 4 coffins," Gabriel said, as casual as if he were ordering a loaf of bread. Elias froze, nearly dropping his plane. "4? For who?" "Just build 'em. Best pine you got. Red velvet lining, and carve a letter on each lid, N, S, E, and W. Have 'em ready by 4 o'clock this afternoon." "You're touched," Elias whispered, his face going pale. "If North finds out, North ought to thank you for the hospitality," Gabriel cut him off. "Get to work, that's the down payment. The rest comes when the job's finished." Leaving the shop, Gabriel began a circuit of Oakhaven. He moved like a ghost, silent and watching. He noted the pitch of the roofs, the location of the fire hydrants, and the gaps between the lumber stacks at the yard. He mapped it all out in his head. Passing the telegraph office, Gabriel saw Brooks inside, head on his desk. Gabriel stepped in, the bell over the door giving a sharp ring. Brooks looked up, his eyes bloodshot. "You still haven't skedaddled. I need to send a wire." Gabriel pushed a slip of paper through the window. "Send it to the territorial judge in Helena. Tell him Oakhaven is ripe for a federal sweep, and I found the proof on Julian Gray's murder." Brooks looked at the paper, then at Gabriel with pure terror. "You're signing your own death warrant. East owns the wires in these parts. That message won't even leave town before it's on North's desk." "I know," Gabriel smiled, a cold, humorless expression. "That's the idea. I want him to know I'm coming. I want him to feel the ground shaking under his boots." Gabriel turned and walked out, leaving Brooks stunned. The sheriff looked at his badge, then at the stranger's broad back. A crazy thought hit him. Maybe, just maybe, this 10-year nightmare was about to break. Gabriel made it back to the farm by noon. He spent the rest of the day fixing Rose's broken gate and prepping for the storm. In the woodshed, Gabriel found old sacks of fertilizer and sulfur. With the steady hands of a former special op, he began mixing. He wasn't making bombs to kill. He was making distraction jars, things that would blow with a hell of a bang to sow panic. Leo sat nearby, listening to the clink of glass and the scrape of metal. "You making instruments, mister?" Leo asked, his small hands roaming over the wooden horse. Gabriel paused, looking into the boy's sightless eyes. "That's right, Leo. The kind of music that makes bad men dance to the tune of justice." "Mister," Leo lowered his voice. "What color is justice?" Gabriel went silent. He thought of old wars, blood, and black powder. "It's the white of the early morning mist, Leo. Real clean, but cold as hell." He placed a hand on the boy's shoulder, feeling the slight frame of a life that needed protecting. In that moment, Gabriel wasn't an executioner. He was just a father trying to keep a child's world from folding. The afternoon ticked by in a heavy silence. Oakhaven was a drum skin stretched to the breaking point, waiting for the first hit. Gabriel Gray stood on Rose's porch, eyes fixed on the road into town. He knew North Vane had the wire. He knew West was itching for a payback. And he knew that before those 4 coffins were finished, the devils would be coming for him. He cinched his gun belt tight, checking the cylinder on his Colt one last time. Everything was set. The hunter's math was done. Now it was time to see who really ran the 4 corners of Oakhaven. "Rose," Gabriel called out without turning around. "Get Leo into the cellar. Don't come out till the mist clears." The sound of iron clanking grew louder, grinding the gravel on the path leading to the farm. It wasn't the sound of a wagon, but the menacing scrape of metal dragging across the dirt. South Vane emerged from the mist, looking even more like a mountain of a man than he had at the saloon. Behind him were 5 hired guns, clad in long duster coats, clutching rifles. Gabriel shoved Rose and Leo deep into the timber shed, bolting the door with a heavy oak beam. He didn't draw his iron immediately. Instead, he stood alone in the yard, arms hanging loose, his shadow stretching long under the pale Montana sunset. "Old man!" South bellowed, stopping 10 yards out. He wrapped the iron chain around his right fist, the links biting into his leathery hide. "My big brother says you've got a message to send. In Oakhaven, the only mailman is Death, and I'm here to sign for the delivery." Gabriel eyed the chain in South's hand. "That the same chain you used to lock the cellar door on my brother?" South let out a dry, hacking laugh. "That runt Julian lasted longer than I figured. Took him 3 weeks to finally kick the bucket. But you won't have nearly that much time." The giant swung his arm. The iron chain tore through the air, striking like a black cobra. Gabriel pivoted slightly. The chain whistled past his chest, shattering a section of the wooden fence behind him into splinters. The moment South went to haul the chain back, Gabriel made his move. He didn't rush South. Instead, he tossed a small dark object toward the gunman standing behind the giant. It was one of the instruments. He built a glass jar filled with magnesium and sulfur with a short fuse. A deafening bang erupted, followed by a blinding flash of white light. The gunmen shrieked, instinctively shielding their eyes. In that heartbeat of chaos, Gabriel cleared his holster. 3 shots rang out so fast they sounded like a single long breath. 3 hired guns crumpled, their rifles hitting the dirt before they even saw the target. South roared like a gut-shot bull, wildly lashing his chain at Gabriel. But Gabriel vanished into the shadows of the lumber stacks, moving like a ghost. He knew he couldn't outmuscle South. He had to outthink him. "Sheriff Brooks," Gabriel's voice boomed, "you're standing in those shadows. Are you going to watch another gray boy get laid in the dirt?" From behind an old pine at the edge of the woods, Brooks stepped out, his revolver trembling. He'd followed South out of cowardice, but the sound of Leo crying in the shed and the flash of Gabriel's light had sparked the last dying ember of his self-respect. "Drop it, South," Brooks yelled. "That's enough. Get lost, you lousy drunk." South turned, swinging his chain at Brooks. That was the opening Gabriel needed. He lunged from behind a lumber crate, not with a gun, but with a heavy iron logging hook. He snagged South's chain, using the giant's own momentum to loop the metal around a massive stone support pillar of the shed. South was jerked back, his own weight slamming him into the ground, his wrist locked tight against the stone. Gabriel stepped in close, the muzzle of his Colt cold against South's temple. The remaining gunmen, seeing their leader trussed up and the sheriff standing tall, hit the trail, disappearing into the woods. "Kill me," South spat, his saliva thick with blood. "My brother's gonna skin you alive." "No, South. I'm leaving you breathing so you can take a message back to North," Gabriel said, his voice so cold it made the giant shiver. "Tell him the coffin with the S is ready. But the one with the N is the one I put the most heart into." Gabriel nodded to Brooks. The sheriff stepped forward and cuffed South, using the giant's own chain. For the first time in 10 years, Brooks felt like that tin star on his chest didn't weigh a ton. That night Rose Farm was eerily quiet. After Brooks hauled South away, to be stashed in a sturdy iron cage in the woods rather than the town jail, where North could bust him out, Gabriel went back inside. Rose sat at the table, clutching Leo. The boy was shaking, but when he heard the familiar uneven footfall, he let out a breath. "What does justice smell like, mister?" Leo asked softly. Gabriel sat beside him, laying his iron on the table. "Today it smells like gun smoke and burnt pine, Leo. But tomorrow it'll smell like the breaking mist." Rose looked at Gabriel, her eyes no longer suspicious, but filled with a painful kind of respect. "You've started a war you can't walk away from. North won't send more lackeys. He'll handle it himself. And West is going to try to put you in the ground as fast as he can." "I've got their number," Gabriel said, spreading his map on the table. "West is a speed freak. He draws the second his opponent's hand twitches. That's his Achilles heel. He's so cocky about his speed, he stops looking at the big picture." He pointed to the main crossroads. "This is where the final showdown happens. 4 tall buildings at the corners. East will be in the newspaper office or the telegraph station, watching the money and the wires. West will stand in the middle of the street. And North will be at the highest point, the church or the bell tower, looking down like he's God Almighty." Gabriel laid out the play for Rose and Brooks. He didn't want them in the line of fire. He needed Rose as his lookout, signaling with mirrors. He needed Brooks to use his badge to clear the streets by 3:45 p.m. "Why 4 o'clock?" Rose asked. "Because that's when the sun casts the longest shadows to the west," Gabriel explained, his eyes glowing with a terrifying sharpness. "The light will shine straight into the eyes of anyone looking down from the north end of town. North will be blinded for exactly 3 minutes. That's the 3 minutes I need to clean house." Early the next morning, Gabriel headed into the old mines. It was a black labyrinth where Julian had breathed his last. Gabriel didn't go to mourn, he went to finish the math. In the tunnels, he found old crates of TNT abandoned by the timber company. He checked the blasting caps, still good. Gabriel began rigging charges at the weak points of the tunnel system running directly under Front Street. He wasn't planning on leveling the town. He was going to trigger a miniature quake to knock the snipers off the rooftops. Every detail was calculated: the wind speed, the angle of the sun, and the psychology of the Vane brothers. Back on the surface, Gabriel stopped by Elias' shop. The 4 coffins were finished black and cold. The letters N, S, E, and W were carved sharp into the lids. "Mr. Gray," Elias said, his voice shaking. "East came by this morning. He didn't smash 'em. He just laughed and said it was real thoughtful of you to build your own bed." "East always was a cold fish," Gabriel said, running a hand over the N coffin. "He thinks everything can be bought with gold or threats. He don't realize some things, like a blood debt, can't be settled with a checkbook." Gabriel hired a horse and wagon, loading all 4 coffins onto it. He took the reins himself, driving the wagon slowly down Oak Haven's main street in broad daylight. Townsfolk hid behind their curtains, terrified by the sight of the strange funeral procession. It was the gutsiest slap in the face they'd ever seen. One man against an empire, bringing the coffins for his own enemies. West stood outside the compass, hand on his holster, his eyes bloodshot from a sleepless night. He started to lunge, but North stepped out of the shadows, placing a hand on his brother's shoulder. "Easy, West," North said, his voice smooth and filled with a morbid curiosity. "Let him play his hand. The bigger the hope, the prettier the fall. At 4 o'clock today, I'll write the final chapter for Gabriel Gray." Gabriel stopped the wagon right at the crossroads, where the massive brass compass above the saloon caught the harsh sun. He unhitched the horse, leaving the wagon and its 4 coffins sitting there like a grim challenge. He climbed the town's bell tower. From up there, he could see all of Oak Haven. He saw Brooks starting to move the workers and women out. He saw Rose on the timber farm roof, her small mirror flashing like a promise. Gabriel sat on the dusty floor and pulled out Leo's wooden horse. With a small knife, he carefully reshaped the broken leg, fixing it with a bead of pine resin. "There you go, son," he whispered, even though his own boy had been in the grave for years. The mist is almost gone. The clock hand on the tower ticked toward 4. The wind picked up from the north, carrying the chill of the grave. Gabriel stood up, threw on his dusty coat, and checked the locations of his distraction jars one last time. The clock on the Oak Haven church tower gave a dry, rhythmic click as it hit 12. 4 o'clock sharp, the town suddenly fell into a bone-chilling silence. No more screaming saws from the mill. No more hammers at the forge. Even the stray curs that usually lurked around the saloon had vanished into the dark alleys. The Montana evening sun poured onto Front Street, a yellow as thick as honey, casting long, dragging shadows that pointed like fingers at the 4 coffins, sitting lonely in the crossroads. Gabriel Gray stepped out from the shadows of the church porch. He wasn't limping anymore. Pure focus had forced his body into a state of peak performance, where physical pain was eclipsed by survival instinct. He stood 10 yards from the wagon, eyes narrowed under the brim of his hat. From the north end of Front Street, the Vane brothers appeared. They walked abreast, their steps steady and full of authority. North Vane walked in the center, hands tucked behind his back, his face as calm as if he were strolling through a garden. To his left was East, clutching a silver-plated revolver, eyes constantly scanning the rooftops. On the right was West, the kid bouncing on his feet like a prize fighter, hands hovering just above the grips of the twin pistols slung low on his hips. At the 4 corners of the crossroads, On high balconies and porches, 4 snipers, the remnants of the Vane army, had taken their positions. One lay on the roof of the telegraph office, one hid behind the pharmacy sign, and the other 2 held the saloon's mezzanine. It was 7 against 1, a lethal equation that any normal gunman would find impossible to solve. "You're a man of your word, Gray," North called out when the gap closed to less than 30 yards. He stopped, looking at the coffin carved with the letter N. "Good craftsmanship. But you forgot one thing. A dead man can't nail his own lid shut." "I don't plan on doing this alone," Gabriel replied. Right then, a blinding flash of light erupted from the timber farm to the west, reflecting off Rose's mirror and shining directly into the second-story windows of the saloon. That was the signal. Boom! A violent explosion ripped from underground right beneath the telegraph office where the sniper was perched. It was the TNT Gabriel had rigged in the old tunnel. The earth buckled, and dust choked the air. The shooter on the roof lost his footing and tumbled onto the scorching asphalt. Second one, Gabriel drew. His Colt didn't roar. It sang a melody of death. His first shot wasn't meant for the 3 brothers in front of him. He spun 188 degrees, firing through the gap in the pharmacy balcony. The second sniper went down before he could even squeeze the trigger of his rifle. Second two, East Vane, the man who calculated everything in dollars and cents, panicked. He fanned his hammer wildly toward Gabriel, but his shots went wide as the ground still shuddered from the blast. Gabriel didn't dive for cover. He took one long stride to the left, using the coffin wagon as a human shield, made of pine. East's bullet thudded into the wood. Gabriel returned the favor with a slug right between East's eyes. The Vane's bookkeeper folded, gold coins from his pocket scattering like dust in the wind. Second three. The 2 shooters at the saloon started unloading. Gabriel threw himself into a roll under the wagon. He yanked a hidden tripwire, triggering the second distraction jar. A thunderous crack erupted right in the sniper's ears, bursting their eardrums in a world of pain. Dazed, they became sitting ducks for Gabriel's Colt. 2 shots, 4 snipers eliminated. Seconds 4 and 5. West Vane let out a roar. This was the moment he showed why he was a legend of Montana's speed. West's hands moved faster than the naked eye could track. His irons cleared leather, muzzle spitting lead in a frantic rhythm. Gabriel felt a bullet graze his bicep, another tearing through the tail of his duster. But Gabriel had already timed West's beat. The kid shot on instinct, and his instinct was to aim for center mass. Gabriel didn't stand still for a high noon draw. He moved in a zigzag, firing back as he went. Gabriel's shots didn't target West's head or heart. He plugged the kid's right shoulder joint, then immediately the left. Both of West's guns hit the dirt. He dropped to his knees, arms dangling uselessly, his face contorted in pain, and the bitter realization that his speed had hit a brick wall of experience. Seconds 6 and 7. North Vane still stood there. He hadn't flinched, even with East dead and West crippled. North slowly reached into his suit jacket. "Don't do it, North," Gabriel said, his breathing terrifyingly steady despite the lead-slinging frenzy. "You think you've won?" North smiled a cruel thin line. "I put an 8th man in the bell tower, right where you were sitting. And me." Gabriel didn't turn around. "You mean this one?" From behind the church, Sheriff Brooks stepped out, carrying the rifle of the sniper North had just mentioned. Brooks had neutralized him before the dance even started. Second 8. For the first time, North's mask of confidence shattered. He pulled a small derringer from his pocket, aiming for Rose, who had just run out from behind the shed to watch. Gabriel didn't give him the chance. His Colt barked for the 6th time. The bullet shattered North's pocket pistol, sending metal shards back into the palm of his hand. Second 9. Gabriel walked up to North. The townsfolk began to peek out. They saw the mighty Vane brothers, one dead, one broken, one on his knees. 11 people died by your hand in 10 years, Gabriel's voice echoed through the crossroads. Including Julian Gray. Today the buck stops here. Second 10. North Vane looked at the coffin marked with an N. He understood that Gabriel's math was absolute. He saw Brooks approaching with the irons, saw the people of Oakhaven looking at him not with fear, but with simmering rage. North slumped down next to East's body. The empire of the 4 directions had collapsed in exactly 10 seconds. The gun smoke drifted away, mingling with the evening mist that was finally starting to lift. Gabriel stood there, in the crosshairs of destiny, his piece still trailing a wisp of smoke. He looked toward west, the teenager still moaning in the dirt. "Get him to the dock," Gabriel ordered Brooks. "He'll live, but those hands will never wrap around a grip again. That's the poetic justice for a man who kills for sport." Brooks nodded, taking the order this time with a visible sense of pride. He slapped the cuffs on North and signaled for the able-bodied men in town to help clear the wreckage. Rose ran to Gabriel, her face streaked with tears. She didn't say a word, just gripped his hand. Gabriel gave a small nod, his eyes searching for Leo. The blind boy stood on Rose's porch, ears tilted toward the crossroads, listening to the newfound silence of the town. "Mr. Gray," Leo called out. Gabriel walked over to the boy. He pulled the repaired wooden horse from his pocket, its four legs standing firm on his palm. He placed it in Leo's hands. "The mist is gone, Leo," Gabriel said softly, ruffling the boy's hair. "From now on, your town won't smell like gunpowder every afternoon." The boy hugged the horse tight and smiled. It was the first honest smile Oakhaven had seen in a dark decade. But Gabriel didn't stick around to take a victory lap. He knew his work here was done. Julian was avenged, justice had been served, and the debt of the living had been paid in blood and grit. He took one last look at the front street crossroads. The pine coffins sat there, reflecting the dying sun. East was already in one. North and West would have to wait for the state's judgment before they needed theirs. South was still in his cage, awaiting transport. Gabriel headed for his horse hitched at the church. He swung his satchel over his shoulder, prepping for the trail ahead. Behind him, Oakhaven began to hum again, but it wasn't the sound of screams or weeping. It was the sound of folks calling out to each other, the sound of clearing debris, and the sound of life rising from the ashes. The rhythm of Gabriel Gray's horse beat steadily against the gravel road, pulling away from the front street crossroads, where dust and gun smoke still hung suspended in the air. He didn't look back, but he felt the weight of hundreds of eyes watching him from behind windows that had just been flung wide. Those weren't the eyes of the cowed and broken anymore. They were the eyes of folks waking up from a 10-year nightmare. At the edge of town, the territorial judge's carriage and the state guard were rolling in. A bugle call rang out sharp and clear, piercing the thick mountain air. Brooks' wire from that morning, along with the evidence Gabriel had quietly rounded up, had finally brought the long arm of the law to Oakhaven. But to Gabriel, those were just late-coming formalities. Real justice had been served with 6 rounds at 4 o'clock. Gabriel pulled up in front of the telegraph office. East Vane was still there, one hand still reaching for the stone step, his face frozen forever in a mask of shock. Gabriel dismounted, stepping past the man who used to pull the strings on every dollar in town. He went inside, where the clerk was still shivering under his desk. "Send one last wire," Gabriel said, dropping a silver dollar on the counter. "To the families of the men who went missing at Sawmill 4. Tell them the truth is out. Julian Gray and the others didn't die in some accident. They went down fighting." The clerk nodded frantically, his trembling fingers hitting the key. The tap-tap echoed through the room, carrying liberation for the souls forgotten in the mines. Gabriel headed back out, swung into the saddle, and rode west toward Rose's spread. He had a goodbye to say, and a grave to visit one last time. At the farm, Rose was waiting on the porch. Leo sat on the steps, clutching the repaired wooden horse. Hearing the familiar clip-clop of Gabriel's mount, the boy bolted upright, his face lighting up. "Mr. Gray, you came back." Gabriel climbed down and walked over to the boy. He dropped to one knee to look Leo in the eye. "I came to say my piece, Leo." The boy's smile faded. "You're moving on. Oakhaven's safe now, ain't it?" "It's safe because you and your mama stayed gritty, not because of me," Gabriel said, placing a rough hand on the boy's shoulder. "This town needs folks like you to build it back up. I'm just a drifter, kid, and the wind don't ever drop anchor in one place for too long." Rose walked over, handing him a bundle of hardtack and a full canteen. Her eyes were still rimmed with red, but she looked a whole lot stronger. "They're sweating north and west. The judge says the Vane's rap sheet is long enough to stretch a rope for north 3 times over. And west," He's looking at a life stretch with hands he can use. And south, Gabriel asked. Brooks took the guards to that iron cage in the woods. South is headed straight for the state pen, Rose said, her voice dropping soft. Thank you, Gabriel, not just for our hides, but for showing Oakhaven that even the devil can be taken down a peg. Gabriel gave a short nod. He led his horse toward the pine ridge behind the farm, where a high knoll overlooked the valley. A simple wooden cross stood there, Julian Gray's final resting place. He stood before the grave for a long stretch, hat in hand. The mountain wind whipped through salt and pepper hair. Gabriel pulled an old federal marshal's badge from his pocket dented by a bullet years ago. It was the only piece of his old life he had left, a thing he'd sworn never to touch again. He laid the badge on his brother's grave. Rest easy, little brother, the debt's settled. Tommy's got his horse, and the world. It's got a little less shadow in it today. When Gabriel walked back to the porch, Rose was holding Leo. The blind boy held the wooden horse high, as if showing it to the sky. Mister, Leo called out as Gabriel swung back into the saddle. What color is hope? Gabriel paused, looking at the horizon where the last rays of sun turned the Montana peaks purple. It's the color of evening light on the mountaintops after a hard rain, Leo. Real bright, and it'll always show up again come morning. He spurred his horse and headed north, disappearing into the trail that led deep into the timber. Behind him, the lights of Oakhaven began to flicker on. The hearth fires weren't the dim glows of fear anymore. They were the warm sparks of folks coming home. Sheriff Brooks stood at the town gate, watching the strangers' back fade into the early morning mist of the following day. Brooks touched the brim of his hat, a sharp, respectful military salute. He knew from here on out, whenever a stranger walked coolly into a saloon and asked for justice, folks would tell the tale of Gabriel Gray, the man who cleared the deck in 10 seconds flat. Gabriel kept riding. He didn't know what lay ahead. Maybe another town being choked by the lawless, or maybe an unmarked grave waiting for him at the end of the trail. But he didn't give a damn. He was destiny's executioner, a soldier with no stripes finding his soul one righteous shot at a time. The Montana sky opened wide above him. The mist was gone. The Oakhaven peak stood out sharp, tall, and free. Gabriel's horse took a long stride through the dew-soaked grass, carrying the man with a heart of stone and a soul of wind into the books of legend. The coffins marked S.E. and W. had their owners. The fourth one, marked with an N, was waiting for North Bain under a gallows tree come spring. Gabriel Gray had been right about the count. He was always right, because justice, when calculated with sacrifice and grit, is an absolute math that don't have no room for error.